And now I give you a commandment, which shall be for a covenant between you and me, that ye have faith, that your faith be steadfast as a rock, that no storms can move, that nothing can disturb, and that it endure through all things, even to the end. As you have faith, so shall your powers and blessings be. This is the balance. This is the balance. This is the balance. Abdul Baha.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another exciting episode of God Passes By, where we go into the first 100 years of the Baha'i era. As per usual, I'll be doing you a quick recap of things we'd covered in our last class. Right, so we know that Baha'u'llah, His Holiness, had returned all the way back from Sulaymaniyah to Baghdad after spending 2 years there. While he was there, many amazing things happened, including verses that were written and odes and poems and soliloquies, absolutely everything. This is described as the turning point of the utmost significance in the history of the Baha'i era. The Babi faith had reached its lowest ebb, it says. Of course, the nominal leader, Mirza Yahya, he wasn't hiding essentially, so he wasn't around. Baha'u'llah had spent some time in Karbala, he'd come back, he'd spent 4 months in the Siyar Chal. When he had his revelation in the Siyar Chal, he didn't share with people straight away. This was concealed, it was hidden from people. This is where things start to change because they now have Baha'u'llah. He's come back in, and remember there was horrible things happening in Baghdad at the time. So during these 7 years after he'd been in prison and he'd come out and he'd gone into the 2 years mountain until the 7 years until he then ends up revealing who he is. We know that the community takes shape, it's regenerated, the prestige, the name of the Babis is now suddenly turning into a good thing. Because previously, the Babis that were around, led by Mirza Yahya and Sayyid Muhammad, had been stealing turbans off people, stealing shoes, going to mosques and taking candles, all sorts of things, even drinking glasses. So the Babis had a horrendous name. Baha'u'llah came to regenerate. The community completely changes, morals are transformed. Mirza Yahya has pretty much sort of faded now into the background, of course, trying to avoid persecutions. But the followers of Sulaymaniyah, the people who had fallen in love with Baha'u'llah in Sulaymaniyah, they then start coming down in search of him. Of course, they start coming down in search of Darvish Muhammad, because this is the name that Baha'u'llah had assumed whilst in the mountains of Kurdistan and in Sulaymaniyah. They also came to look for the house of Mirza Musa the Babi. That's all they knew, that he was going to be in the house of Mirza Musa the Babi. A whole bunch of people now who start flooding through, a whole bunch of admirers. We have Ibn al-Usi, who was the Mufti of Baghdad, who starts to come and learn more and eventually is one of his followers. We have Sheikh Abu Salam, we have Sheikh Abu Qadir and Sayyid Dawoodi, these very important people who had come in and absolutely immersed and had taken on the faith of Baha'u'llah. There were poets, there were mystics, there were notables, people who lived there, people who travelled, who came to see who Baha'u'llah was, who this person was that was rejuvenating everything so beautifully and powerfully. Government officials such as Abdullah Pasha, Mahmoud Agha, Ali Mardan, they were coming all of a sudden, and now they were being opened to the whole thing. We had princes, the Naibul Iyaleh was coming, the Sajjad Dawleh, the Saifud Dawleh, Zainul Abidin Khan, the Fakhrud Dawleh. These people are all now coming, they're thronging to see Baha'u'llah and to understand and take some knowledge from him if they can. So really things are starting to change. This is where the faith is now being opened to a completely different demographic, if you like. Beforehand, most of the people who were enrolled, most of the letters they're living were followers of Sheikh Ahmad, they were sheikhis. People were absolutely embracing the faith and coming into it. But now we're talking to Sufis, we're talking to Sunnis, we're talking to these princes and government officials. Things are starting to shift. It's being opened. Just in the same way as maybe a long time ago, we wouldn't have someone called Rick from Oregon there with us, but now he's here. It's all suddenly been opened. Mariam Khorasani sitting in London, it's really exploding and it's going global and developing. So a very exciting time. A few years after the period of Baha'u'llah and Sulaymaniyah, the house of Sulaymaniyah Ghanem, which was in Karkh Quarter, which was surrounded by many people of different faiths and the rest of it, this is known as the most great house, the Beit Azam. And it's a really phenomenal house that was transformed as this house with nothing really in. The fact that His Holiness Baha'u'llah had been in it, it had completely transformed and essentially becomes a center where people throng to it. So many want to come and see Baha'u'llah, they want to be around his presence, they want to understand. most of these visitors who came, we had some phenomenal people who came across to see His Holiness Baha'u'llah. We know that 4 of the Bab's cousins, they came, his maternal uncle, Haji Mirza Said Muhammad, the granddaughter of Fath Ali Shah herself, the Varagatul Rizvan, Mullah Muhammad Ghaini had come, the person who built the Babia house in Mashhad, Mullah Sadegh Khorasani, Mullah Bagher, all these people, Dayan himself, it's like a hall of fame, the people who visited. Mirza Muhammad Hassan and Hussein, the beloved and king of martyrs. Mirza Muhammad Nahri had come as well, the soon-to-be father-in-law of Abdul Baha, Sayyid Ismail Zavari, who's known as Zabeh. All of these people had come, and they had now gone back with many of the writings of Baha'u'llah and of the Bab, and they're spreading it, and they're going around to different areas. There were many people who had claimed, if you remember, it was said Abdul Baha had told us that 25 people of these Babis had claimed to be him whom God shall make manifest. They made this claim, and actually these people were based in Baghdad, in Karbala, in Qom, in Kashan, in Tabriz, and these people who'd come to visit Baha'u'llah had gone back and they dispersed, and for the most part had managed to bring them back into the ranks and said, look, this isn't really the way it's gone down, Baha'u'llah says. So huge changes are being made, and this is why it's the turning point of utmost significance, the fact that Baha'u'llah then comes back to Baghdad, because he's really going to set things off. The son of Muhammad Shah, Abbas Mirza, and also Mirza Malham Khan, these other government officials, they were hoping to use Baha'u'llah essentially to try and further their cause. They weren't interested in faith, but they thought, look, let's get him involved because he's very powerful. Baha'u'llah, of course, was having none of it. Arnold Kemble, the fantastic British gentleman, had offered citizenship to Baha'u'llah. He said, look, why don't you come? We'll give you citizenship. We'll get you out of this trouble. We can also take you to India. You like a curry. So he thought. Again, Baha'u'llah wasn't interested. That's not why he was here. During this last year in Baghdad, the governor, Namek Pasha, who had respected Baha'u'llah so much, he'd called him one of the lights of the age. He, for a period of 3 months and 5 requests from Ali Pasha, kept getting correspondence saying that Baha'u'llah had to move to Istanbul. His love for Baha'u'llah was so much that he refused to tell Baha'u'llah until eventually he had. Baha'u'llah had managed to come and renew the spirit that the Bab's teachings held. You know, as I say, the Babi community had really gone downwards, that people were starting to lose faith. They were behaving in ways that were not befitting to the Bab or his teachings in any way, shape, or form. Baha'u'llah reinforced this idea of no backbiting, of truthfulness, of patience. Abdul Baha says that Baha'u'llah had reformed the community and managed to regulate its affairs, bringing about peace and tranquility in the hearts of people. Baha'u'llah then goes on to mention justice and this idea that if his own brother that he'd grown up with, Mirza Musa Agha Khalim, if he had done something bad enough, then he should have his hands tied behind his back and be thrown into the river, making this point that there's no special favors for anybody just because he's Baha'u'llah, that if somebody intercedes and says, look, he's my brother, no, that's not how it works. Justice is to be at the center. He says, rather than harming anybody else, I'd rather somebody harms my own son. This is the level at which Baha'u'llah is really putting himself. And he says, look, we should all do what God wants us to do. We should behave well. Some of the Babis, some of the followers of Baha'u'llah as well at this time, they came up with this little pact, this punishment pact, as I like to call it, where they would agree if one person would do something bad, then they would bastinado each other. This is the level of justice that they're trying to get with each other, that whatever happens, justice is done. There's this beautiful thing where I believe it's Abdul Baha who says that the thorn would even blossom into a flower. This is how much things will change. And it ends up telling us about Beit Azam, this most great house, how this basically was a ruinous house essentially, but it turned into something quite remarkable, a paradise on earth. Mariam Khorasani always smiling. I don't know, it's bringing us so much joy, this. All I can see is your smiley little smiley face there, which is making me smile. Speaking of smiley faces, could I ask Khanum Khorodad, please, if she wouldn't mind, to kick us off with the reading, which just gets me in the mood so much. Thank you.
It was this same reception room which, in spite of its rude simplicity, had so charmed the Shuja'ud-Dawla that he had expressed to his fellow princes his intention of building a duplicate of it in his home on Kazemi. He may well succeed, Baha'u'llah is reported to have smilingly remarked, when apprised of his intention in reproducing outwardly the exact counterpart of this low-roofed room made of mud and straw with its diminutive garden. What of his ability to open unto it the spiritual doors leading to the hidden words of God. I know not how to explain it. Another prince, Zainul Abidin, the Khan, the Fakhrud-Dawleh, describing the atmosphere which pervaded that refreshment room, had affirmed, were all the sorrows of the world to be crowded into my heart, they would, I feel, all vanquish when in the presence of Baha'u'llah. It is as if I had entered paradise itself. The joyous feast which these companions, despite their extremely modest earnings, continually offered in honor of their beloved, the gatherings lasting far into the night, in which they loudly celebrated with prayers, poetry, and song, the praises of the Bab, of Quddus, and of Baha'u'llah, the fasts they observed, the vigils they kept, the dreams and visions which fired their souls, and which they recounted to each other with feelings of unbounded enthusiasm. The eagerness with which those who served Baha'u'llah performed his errands, waited upon his needs, and carried the heavy skins or water for his ablutions and other domestic purposes. The acts of imprudence which in moments of rapture they occasionally committed. The expressions of wonder and admiration which their words and acts evoked in a populace that has seldom witnessed such demonstrations of religious transport and personal devotion. These and many others will forever remain associated with the history of that immortal period, intervening between the birth hour of Baha'u'llah's revelation and its announcement on the eve of his departure from Iraq. Numerous and striking are the anecdotes which have been recounted by those whom duty, accident, or inclination had in the course of these poignant years brought into direct contact with Baha'u'llah. Many and moving are the testimonies of bystanders who were privileged to gaze on his countenance, observe his gait, or overhear his remarks as he moved through the lanes and streets of the city or paced the banks of the river, of worshippers who watched him pray in their mosque, of the mendicants, the sick, the aged, and the unfortunate whom he succored, healed, supported, and comforted, of the visitors, from the haughtiest prince to the meanest beggar who crossed his threshold and sat at his feet, of the merchant, the artisan, and the shopkeeper who waited upon him and supplied his daily needs, of his devotees who had perceived the signs of his hidden glory, of his adversaries who were confounded or disarmed by the power of his utterance and the warmth of his love, of the priests and laymen, the noble and the learned, who besought him with the intention of either challenging his authority, or testing his knowledge, or investigating his claims, or confessing their shortcomings, or declaring their conversion to the cause he had espoused. From such treasury of precious memories, it will suffice my purpose to cite but a single instance, that of one of his ardent lovers, a native of Zawere, Sayyid Ismail by name, surnamed Zabih, the sacrifice, formerly a noted divine, taciturn, meditative, and wholly severed from every earthly tie, whom self-appointed task on which he prided himself was to sweep the approaches of the house in which Baha'u'llah was dwelling. Unwinding his green turban, the ensign of this holy lineage, from his head, he would at the hour of dawn gather up with infinite patience the rubble which the footsteps of his beloved had trodden, would blow the dust from the granaries of the wall adjacent to the door of that house, would collect the sweepings in the folds of his own cloak, and scorning to cast his burden for the feet of others to tread upon, would carry it as far as the banks of river and throw it into its waters. Unable at length to contain the ocean of love that surged within his soul, he, after having denied himself for 40 days both sleep and sustenance, and rendering for the last time the service so dear to his heart, betook himself one day to the banks of the river on the road to Cozumane, performed his ablutions, lay down on his bank with his face turned towards Baghdad, severed his throat with a razor, laid the razor upon his breast, and expired. Nor was the only one who had meditated such an act and was determined to carry it out. Others were ready to follow suit, and had not Baha'u'llah promptly intervened and ordered the refugees living in Baghdad to return immediately to their native land. Nor could the authorities, when it was definitely established that Zabi had died by his own hand, remain indifferent to a cause whose leader could inspire so rare a devotion in and hold such absolute sway over the hearts of his lovers. Apprised of the apprehensions that episode had evoked in certain quarters in Baghdad, Baha'u'llah reported to have remarked Sayyid Ismail was possessed of such power and might that were he to be confronted by all the peoples of the earth, he would, without doubt, be able to establish his ascendancy over them. No blood, he is reported to have said with reference to the same Zabi, whom he extolled as the king and beloved of martyrs, has till now been poured upon the earth, as pure as the blood he shed. So intoxicated were those who had quaffed from the cup of Baha'u'llah's presence, is yet another testimony from the pen of Nabil, who was himself an eyewitness of most of these stirring episodes, that in their eyes the palaces of kings appeared more ephemeral than a spider's web. The celebrations and festivities that were theirs were such as the kings of the earth would have never dreamt of. I myself, with 2 others, he relates, lived in a room which was devoid of furniture. Baha'u'llah entered it one day and looking about him remarked, "Its emptiness pleases me. In my estimation, it is preferable to many a spacious palace, inasmuch as the beloved of God are occupied in it with remembrance of the incomparable friend, with hearts that are wholly emptied of the dross of this world." His own life was characterized by that same austerity and evinced that same simplicity which marked the lives of his beloved companions. There was a time in Iraq, he himself affirms in one of his tablets, when the ancient beauty had no change of linen. The one shirt he possessed would be washed, dried, and worn again. Many a night, continues Nabil, depicting the lives of those saved of previous companions. No less than 10 persons subsisted on no more than a pennyworth of dates. No one knew to whom actually belonged the shoes, the cloaks, or the robes that were to be found in their houses. Whoever went to the bazaar could claim that the shoes upon his feet were his own, and each one who entered the presence of Baha'u'llah could affirm that the cloak and robe he then wore belonged to him. Their own names they had forgotten. Their hearts were emptied of aught else except adoration for their beloved. Oh, for the joy of those days and the gladness and wonder of those hours.
Thank you so much, Honor Makholoda. Beautifully read as per usual. We are in Baghdad. It's said that there's this room that is so beautiful in the Beit Azam, so beautiful that one of the government officials himself wants to rebuild this room. Now you imagine someone who's a prisoner, who's been kicked out of Persia, who's in Baghdad, managed to bring so much joy and love and wisdom to this room that one of the government officials wants to create a room just the same to try and bring this love into his area in Kazimain. Kazimain being where two of the Imams, the 7th and 9th of Shia Islam, are buried. So he could do whatever he wanted, he could build whatever he wanted, but he wanted to build this room, and there was nothing special about the room apart from the power that it possessed. We know that Zayd al-Abidin Khan even says that even if he were to be afflicted with all the sorrows in the world, whilst being in that room in the presence of Baha'u'llah, it wouldn't matter. Everything would just vanish. Such was the love. Can you imagine actually a physical place that is just filled with love? Maybe you can. Perhaps the Shrine of the Bab, the Shrine of Baha'u'llah does that for you. We know there's something so magical about these places. There's actually a beautiful story that maybe I'll share with you later to do with the Shrine of the Bab and the power and the majesty that's around it. But anyway, maybe I'll come back to that. So people were absolutely in love with Baha'u'llah, and you would be. Imagine the glory of God being in your presence. Nabil then goes on to say there are many stories, many testaments of people that had met Baha'u'llah, that had heard his remarks, that had just watched him pray in mosques, for example, people that he'd helped, shopkeepers that had sold him things, even his adversaries who were eventually confounded and disarmed. All these people, anyone it was that came across Baha'u'llah, they all have a story about him, that something had taken place. Nabil then decides to take one story in particular about somebody named Sayyid Ismail Zavareh. Now, this person was also given the surname Zabeh. Such a beautiful person this was. He has actually been spoken about, I believe, the Revelation of Baha'u'llah, book 2, I think it is. There's a lot about him. This is the person that Baha'u'llah was approached by him. And he said, please, I want you to show me the next world. And Baha'u'llah, parting his two fingers, then gives him a glimpse, after repeated request, gives him a glimpse of what the next world would be like. So I was so in love with Baha'u'llah, and he would also see the sorrows that Baha'u'llah would deal with. He would sweep up the dust anywhere Baha'u'llah would walk. He'd take off his turban, he'd put them in his cloak, and he'd clean them up and throw them out. He was so besotted, so in love with Baha'u'llah, that after 40 days of meditation without sleep and sustenance, he eventually, on the banks of the river on the way to Kazimain, he ends up taking his own life. Now, it might seem strange, why would he do this? And I imagine his love for Baha'u'llah, to see this suffering, was so great, and he knew Baha'u'llah was in both worlds, and he saw how amazing the next world was. He just wanted to be there. He just couldn't take it. It was too powerful. Just like staring at the sun itself is too powerful for our eyes. It was just too much for him to take. He's also compared to the king and the beloved of martyrs, saying that no blood was as pure as this as was shed. So devout and absolutely mind-blowingly in love. Others wanted to follow suit. There were other people who also wanted to take their own lives and they wanted to sacrifice. They didn't know what to do exactly, but Baha'u'llah intervened and said, look, no, this isn't what you're meant to be doing. You're not meant to be taking your lives. You're meant to be giving up your lives in a sense to spread this message, to transform the hearts of people. A lot of the authorities who were there were absolutely mind-blown once they realized that there was no foul play, that Zabeh had indeed taken his own life. They realized, wow, the love is so strong. They were absolutely and utterly blown away. Baha'u'llah says that Zabeh had such power that if all the people in the world came and arose against him, he would be able to overpower them. Such was his pureness and the energy in which he carried. This place, this house that was taken, was like a palace. And the lovers of the Babis would view palaces as more temporary than a spider's web. They were so detached that when they would look at things, they wouldn't think, oh, this is a palace, I want this building. It's like, no, like a spider's web had become that temporary. They had become so detached. Nabil lived in a building with two other people. He had two flatmates. I would have loved to have been one of them. And apparently Baha'u'llah visits this, and he sees that it's pretty much empty. And Baha'u'llah talks about how beautiful this place is. So again, not a place adorned with all these riches. And he says it's beautiful because it contains the beloved of God. Baha'u'llah says there was one period that when he was in Iraq, where he only had one shirt, where he'd wear this shirt. Can you imagine the glory of God? with just one shirt, and he's having to take this off and wash it every night and re-wear it. People were poor. They were so poor, a lot of these Babis, that 10 of them would get together and they'd barely have anything to eat, and they'd have clothes that were almost shared amongst themselves. But they didn't care. They were so enraptured. They were so in love. This is where the fortunes of the faith are changing. This is where you start seeing the light of Baha'u'llah. And he hasn't even declared at this point who he is. How magical.
Enormous expansion in the scope and volume of Baha'u'llah's writings after his return from Sulaymaniyah is yet another distinguishing feature of the period under review. The verses that streamed during those years from his pen, described as a copious rain by himself, whether in the form of epistles, exhortations, commentaries, apologies, dissertations, prophecies, prayers, odes, or specific tablets, contributed to a marked degree to the reformation and progressive unfoldment of the Babi community, to the broadening of its outlook, to the expansion of its activities, and to the enlightenment of the minds of its members. So prolific was this period that during the first 2 years after his return from his retirement, according to the testimony of Nabil, who was at that time living in Baghdad, the unrecorded verses that streamed from his lips averaged in a single day and night the equivalent of the Quran. As to those verses which he either dictated or wrote himself, their number was no less remarkable than either the wealth of material they contained or the diversity of subjects to which they referred. A vast, and indeed the greater proportion of these writings were, alas, lost irretrievably to posterity. No less an authority than Mirza Akbar, Baha'u'llah's amanuensis, affirms, as reported by Nabil, that by the express order of Baha'u'llah, hundreds of thousands of verses, mostly written by his own hand, were obliterated and cast into the river. Finding me reluctant to execute his orders, Mirza Akbar has related to Nabil, Baha'u'llah would reassure me, saying, "None is to be found at this time worthy to hear these melodies." Not once or twice, but innumerable times was I commanded to repeat this act. A certain Muhammad Karim, a native of Shiraz, who had been a witness to the rapidity and the manner in which the Bab had penned the verses with which he was inspired, has left the following testimony to posterity, after attaining during those days the presence of Baha'u'llah and beholding with his own eyes what he himself had considered to be the only proof of the mission of the Promised One. I bear witness that the verses revealed by Baha'u'llah were superior in the rapidity with which they were penned, in the ease with which they flowed, in their lucidity, their profundity, and sweetness to those which I myself saw pour from the pen of the Bab when in his presence. Had Baha'u'llah no other claim to greatness, this was sufficient in the eyes of the world and its people that he produced such verses as have streamed this day from his pen. Foremost among the priceless treasures cast forth from the billowing ocean of Baha'u'llah's revelation ranks the Kitab-i-Iqan, Book of Certitude, revealed within the space of 2 days and 2 nights in the closing years of that period, 1278 AH, 1862 AD. It was written in fulfillment of the prophecy of the Bab, who had specifically stated that the Promised One would complete the text of the unfinished Persian Bayan, and in reply to the questions addressed to Baha'u'llah by the as yet unconverted maternal uncle of the Bab, Haji Mirza Sayyid Muhammad, while on a visit with his brother Haji Mirza Hassan Ali to Karbala. A model of Persian prose of a style at once original, chaste, and vigorous, and remarkably lucid, both cogent in argument and matchless in its irresistible eloquence. This book, setting forth in outline the grand redemptive scheme of God, occupies a position unequaled by any work in the entire range of Baha'i literature except the Kitab-i-Aqdas, Baha'u'llah's most holy book. Revealed on the eve of the declaration of his mission, it proffered to mankind the choice sealed wine, whose seal is of musk, and broke the seals of the book referred to by Daniel, and disclosed the meaning of the words destined to remain closed up till the time of the end. Within a compass of 200 pages, it proclaims unequivocally the existence and oneness of a personal God, unknowable, inaccessible, the source of all revelation, eternal, omniscient, omnipresent, and almighty. Asserts the relativity of religious truth and the continuity of divine revelation. affirms the unity of the prophets, the universality of their message, the identity of their fundamental teachings, the sanctity of their scriptures, and the twofold character of their stations, denounces the blindness and perversity of the divines and doctors of every age, cites and elucidates the allegorical passages of the New Testament, the abstruse verses of the Quran, and the cryptic Mohammedan traditions which have bred those age-long misunderstandings, doubts, and animosities that have sundered and kept apart the followers of the world's leading religious systems. Enumerates the central prerequisites for the attainment by every true seeker of the object of his quest. Demonstrates the validity, the sublimity, and significance of the Bab's revelation. Acclaims the heroism and detachment of his disciples. Foreshadows and prophesies the worldwide triumph of the revelation promised to the people of the Bayan. Upholds the purity and innocence of the Virgin Mary, glorifies the Imams of the faith of Muhammad, celebrates the martyrdom and lauds the spiritual sovereignty of the Imam Hussein, unfolds the meaning of such symbolic terms as return, resurrection, seal of the prophets, and day of judgment, adumbrates and distinguishes between the three stages of divine revelation, and expatiates in glowing terms upon the glories and wonders of the city of God, renewed at fixed intervals by the dispensation of providence, for the guidance, the benefit, and salvation of all mankind. Well may it be claimed that of all the books revealed by the author of the Baha'i Revelation, this book alone, by sweeping away the age-long barriers that have so insurmountably separated the great religions of the world, has laid down a broad and unassailable foundation for the complete and permanent reconciliation of their followers.
Baha'u'llah in this period, his writings are like a copious rain. The rapidity with which his writings now coming down. Now we know His Holiness the Bab wrote so intensely, 5 million recorded words that we have in Haifa. Baha'u'llah has 6 million. The Bab did that in 6 years essentially. Baha'u'llah in 40 years. So the Bab was really cramming a lot in and reveals non-stop. But Baha'u'llah manages in one day and one night, it says, reveal verses to equal that of the Quran, which is just absolutely mind-blowing. If you remember the Bab, when he was in Tabriz, he said that as a proof, he would, in 2 days and 2 nights, reveal verses that would equal the Quran. So now we're talking a level that's just absolutely mind-blowing for somebody to be able to do that. Verses, not just random verses, obviously verses that make sense, that are so powerful and are so moving. And this is one of the highest proofs. Baha'u'llah's amanuensis, Mirza Agha Jan, who had written so many of these things, say there were so many things that were written and that were said. And so many times Baha'u'llah asked him to take these writings that were now revealed and throw them in the river. Can you imagine the writings being thrown in the river? And why? Because no one was worthy. No one was worthy to receive them. It's just mind-blowing. Muhammad Karim of Shiraz talks about how he was in the presence of Baha'u'llah and he saw the rapidity of which Baha'u'llah was writing and the way it would flow and how beautiful it was. Again, I don't think you can really explain how beautiful it is. I mean, take a look at Baha'u'llah's writings, that speaks for itself, but it's absolutely mind-blowing. The Aghan that was written in 2 days and nights, which was written at the request of Haji Mirza Sayyid Muhammad, one of the uncles of the Bab, as a proof. And this book is something that the Bab said that him whom God shall make manifest will continue. Again, remember, this is a continuation of the Bayan. You have the Bayan with its Vaheds and its 19 chapters. I think it's 9 Vaheds and there's 19 chapters, but the last one only has 10, and this is the continuation. So it's a mind-blowing piece of work. And within this book, and just to name a few things, there were many things, and I suggest you go back and you look at them and see them for yourself. He affirms the unity of the prophets. He talks about their sanctity, of the perversity of the generation that's around, the abstruse verses of the Quran he goes into and he explains. He talks about the validity, the sublimity, the significance of the Bab. He glorifies the Imams of Prophet Muhammad. He upholds the purity and the innocence of Mary. It's amazing the things that he touches within this book. It's absolutely phenomenal. And it's not something that we can summarize here. And can I ask Nabil, actually, just to explain this bit about the book of Daniel?
Yeah, it's a beautiful reference. So it says that it unsealed the books. Daniel had this amazing vision, which he himself didn't fully understand. And he was told that the books were sealed until the time of the end. And the Guardian explains that actually it is the Kitab-i-Aghan that unsealed the book that Daniel was trying to understand for more than 2,000 years. So it's a phenomenal book. There's also a reference to unsealing the choice wine that was sealed with musk. And in ancient times, for the really good wine, the good stuff, you would seal it with a waxy musk. And the musk was a special wax that had a very nice aroma. The stuff that was not so good, you put clay. You use clay to seal the bottle of wine. So again, Baha'u'llah is explaining how the Guardian is making allusion to how significant the Quran is. In fact, it's the most important book for the doctrinal teachings of the Baha'i faith. And it's the second most important book overall in the Baha'i dispensation.
Mr. Dunbar actually relates this story, I believe, in Central America. He would translate into Spanish, and after this really profound talk, somebody says, "Yeah, but what about wine? What about wine?" And Mr. Dunbar's thinking, "Oh, well, I don't know if I want to try. Do I want to?" Mr. Dunbar's looking down. "We love wine. The Baha'is, we love wine." Baha'u'llah talks about the wine of renunciation, the wine of this, the wine of that, which was quite funny. That person ended up possibly declaring. Who knows what happened? Many funny stories that Mr. Dunbar has.
Next to this unique repository of inestimable treasures must rank that marvelous collection of gem-like utterances, the hidden words, with which Baha'u'llah was inspired as he paced, wrapped in his meditations, the banks of the Tigris. Revealed in the year 1274 AH, partly in Persian, partly in Arabic, it was originally designated the Hidden Book of Fatima and was identified by its author with the book of that same name, believed by Shia Islam to be in the possession of the promised Qaim and to consist of words of consolation addressed by the angel Gabriel at God's command to Fatima and dictated to the Imam Ali for the sole purpose of comforting her in her hour of bitter anguish after the death of her illustrious father. The significance of this dynamic spiritual leaving cast into the life of the world for the reorientation of the minds of men, the edification of their souls, and the rectification of their conduct can be best judged by the description of its character given in the opening passage by its author. This is that which has descended from the realm of glory, uttered by the tongue of power and might, and revealed unto the prophets of old. We have taken the inner essence thereof and clothed it in the garment of brevity, as a token of grace unto the righteous, that they may stand faithful unto the covenant of God, and may fulfill in their lives his trust, and in the realm of spirit obtain the gem of divine virtue. To these two outstanding contributions to the world's religious literature, occupying respectively positions of unsurpassed preeminence among the doctrinal and ethical writings of the author of the Baha'i dispensation, was added during that same period a treatise that may well be regarded as his greatest mystical composition, designated as the Seven Valleys, which he wrote in answer to the questions of Sheikh Muhyiddin, the Qadi of Khanikain, in which he describes the 7 stages which the soul of the seeker must needs traverse ere it can attain the object of its existence. The 4 Valleys, an epistle addressed to the learned Sheikh Abdul Rahman Karkuti, the tablet of the Holy Mariner, in which Baha'u'llah prophesies the severe afflictions that are to befall him, the Law-e-Hurriya, the tablet of the Maiden, in which events of a far remoter future are foreshadowed, the Surah Sabr, the Surah of Patience, revealed on the first day of Rezvan, which extols Wahid and his fellow sufferers in Nayriz, the commentary on the letters prefixed in the surahs of the Quran, his interpretation of the letter Vav, mentioned in the writings of Sheikh Ahmad Asai, and of other abstruse passages in the works of Sayyid Kazim Rashdi, the Law-e-Madinatut Tawheed, Tablet of the City of Unity, the Sahifiyya Shatiyya, the Musibat Hurufat Aliyat, the Tafsir-e-Hu, the Jawahirul Asrar, and a host of other writings in the form of epistles, odes, homilies, specific tablets, commentaries and prayers, contributed each in its own way to swell the rivers of everlasting life, which poured forth from the abode of peace and lent a mighty impetus to the expansion of the Bab's faith in both Persia and Iraq, quickening the souls and transforming the character of its adherents. The undeniable evidences of the range and magnificence of Baha'u'llah's rising power, his rapidly waxing prestige, the miraculous transformation which, by precept and example, he had effected in the outlook and character of his companions from Baghdad to the remotest towns and hamlets in Persia, the consuming love for him that glowed in their bosoms, the prodigious volume of writings that streamed day and night from his pen, could not fail to fan into flame the animosity which smouldered in the breasts of his Shia and Sunni enemies. Now that his residence was transferred to the vicinity of the strongholds of Shia Islam, and he himself brought into direct and almost daily contact with the fanatical pilgrims who thronged the holy places of Najaf, Karbala, and Kazimain, a trial of strength between the growing brilliance of his glory and the dark and embattled forces of religious fanaticism could no longer be delayed. A spark was all that was required to ignite this combustible material of all the accumulated hatreds, fears, and jealousies which the revived activities of the Babis had inspired. This was provided by a certain Sheikh Abdul Hussein, a crafty and obstinate priest, whose consuming jealousy of Baha'u'llah was surpassed only by his capacity to stir up mischief, both among those of high degree and also amongst the lowest of the low, Arab or Persian, who thronged the streets and markets of Kazimain, Karbala, and Baghdad. He it was whom Baha'u'llah had stigmatized in his tablets by such epithets as the scoundrel, the schemer, the wicked one, who drew the sword of his self against the face of God, in whose soul Satan hath whispered, and from whose impiety Satan flies, the depraved one, from whom originated and to whom will return all infidelity, cruelty, and crime. Largely through the efforts of the Grand Vizier, who wished to get rid of him, this troublesome mujtahid had been commissioned by the Shah to proceed to Karbala to repair the holy sites in that city. Watching for his opportunity, he allied himself with Mirza Buzurg Khan, a newly appointed Persian consul general, who, being in the same iniquitous turn of mind as himself, a man of mean intelligence, insincere, without foresight or honour, and a confirmed drunkard, soon fell a prey to the influence of that vicious plotter and became the willing instrument of his designs. Their first concerted endeavour was to obtain from the governor of Baghdad, Mustafa Pasha, through a gross distortion of the truth, an order for the extradition of Baha'u'llah and his companions, an effort which miserably failed. Recognizing the futility of any attempt to achieve his purpose through the intervention of the local authorities, Sheikh Abdul Hussein began, through the sedulous circulation of dreams, which he first invented and then interpreted, to excite the passions of a superstitious and highly inflammable population. The resentment engendered by the lack of response he met with was aggravated by his ignominious failure to meet the challenge of an interview prearranged between himself and Baha'u'llah. Mirza Buzurg Khan, on his part, used his influence in order to arouse the animosity of the lower elements of the population against the common adversary, by inciting them to affront him in public, in the hope of provoking some rash retaliatory act that could be used as a ground for false charges through which the desired order for Baha'u'llah's extradition may be procured. This attempt too proved abortive, as the presence of Baha'u'llah, who despite the warnings and pleadings of his friends, continued to walk unescorted, both by day and by night, through the streets of the city, was enough to plunge his would-be molesters into consternation and shame. Well aware of their motives, he would approach them, rally them on their intentions, joke with them, and leave them covered with confusion and firmly resolved to abandon whatever schemes they had in mind. The consul general had even gone so far as to hire a ruffian, a Turk named Reza, for the sum of 100 tumans, provide him with a horse and 2 pistols, and order him to seek out and kill Baha'u'llah, promising him that his own protection would be fully assured. Reza, learning one day that his would-be victim was attending the public bath, eluded the vigilance of the Babis in attendance, entered the bath with a pistol concealed in his cloak, and confronted Baha'u'llah in the inner chamber, only to discover that he lacked the courage to accomplish his task. He himself, years later, related that on another occasion he was lying in wait for Baha'u'llah, pistol in hand, when on Baha'u'llah's approach, he was so overcome with fear that the pistol dropped from his hand, whereupon Baha'u'llah bade Agha Kalim, who accompanied him, to hand it back to him and show him the way to his home.
So there is this tradition that there was the hidden book of Fatima that was revealed to her to console her upon the passing of her illustrious father, the Prophet Muhammad. And there was kind of this tradition. So Baha'u'llah used this tradition to say that, this book was that hidden book that had gone missing. But it's not that, I don't think we believe literally that that was the case. It was just spiritually or metaphorically, he was trying to demonstrate the importance of that book. And I think Abdu'l-Baha also said in one of his tablets that if Baha'u'llah had revealed no other book than the hidden words for the guidance of humanity, that would have been enough.
Yes, this book, The Hidden Words, it takes the inner essence and it clothes it in the garment of brevity, is what it says. So a very powerful book. Another book was The Seven Valleys, that was written in response to questions posed by Sheikh Muhyiddin. Now, this wasn't the original Sheikh Muhyiddin, but this was someone who was named after the original Sheikh Muhyiddin, who was around in the year 1165, and here is a portrait of him. Baha'u'llah makes reference to him, how he provides these rivulets, like these small rivers that eventually joins Baha'u'llah's ocean. He's also known as Ibn Arabi as well. People who were inspired by this include those incredible poets such as Rumi and Hafez and Sa'di. So he really had some incredible work. These questions which Baha'u'llah then responds to in the Seven Valleys. The Four Valleys was addressed to Sheikh Abdul Rahman, the Surah Sabr, the Surah of Patience. This was something that Wahid was to extol, Wahid in Nayriz, Wahid and the people who were there in the Battle of Nayriz. There's so many books that were written in odes, sheer volume, which actually helps really grow this Babi faith. So even though he's not a manifestation of God, he's just a follower, so it seems, but such powerful works are released that really helps the Babi faith grows. Now, whilst this was amazing, whilst people were blown away by a lot of this, this also roused the jealousy of the people that were against him. Now, of course, remember, Baha'u'llah's in the Baghdad area, which very close to it, we have Karbala, and we have Najaf. Najaf, obviously, which is the home of Imam Ali, and Karbala, the home of Imam Hussein, and then we've got Qazimain quite close, which is, as I say, the 7th and 9th Imams. So there are many fanatics that are coming there to pay their homage, and they're roused by the jealousy by someone named Sheikh Abdul Hussein. Now, he was this obstinate priest that was there, and he actually had been sent in order to repair the holy places. That's the whole reason he was there. But he sees that Baha'u'llah's everywhere. People are talking about Baha'u'llah. The name of Baha'u'llah is on everyone's lips, and he's incredibly jealous. So he decides to try and rouse the populace against him. Baha'u'llah describes him as the scoundrel, the schemer, in whose ear Satan has whispered. The Shah had, as I say, had sent him to go and repair these holy places, but he's not interested in doing that. He's more interested in trying to bring down His Holiness Baha'u'llah. There's also Mirza Bazar Khan, who's the Persian consul, who's also there. So these two, they team up together, and they basically do all they can to create problems. They try and distort certain facts, and they ask the governor of Baghdad, Mustafa Pasha, who likes Baghdad, to try and extradite Baha'u'llah, but this was just withdrawn. Certain dreams were made up as well, these magical dreams of this happened, that happened, to try and push people against Baha'u'llah, to try and cause as many problems as possible. Mirza Bazar Khan, the Persian consul, he then tries to get some of the poor people to try and provoke Baha'u'llah, hoping to get a response so that they could say, look, Baha'u'llah's responded in this way, but Baha'u'llah wasn't fazed by any of this. And then we have this ruffian, this Turkish ruffian as it's described, someone by the name of Reza, and he was given a horse and 2 pistols. He was basically given the charge to go and assassinate Baha'u'llah. And they said, don't worry, just go and assassinate Baha'u'llah, we will look after you. Just go and do this one task. So he's going on his horse, and then eventually he realizes that Baha'u'llah's in the public bath. So he manages to get past the Babis, and he goes with his cloak, with his pistol, and he sees Baha'u'llah, and he's going to shoot Baha'u'llah. No, he's not. He doesn't have the courage to do it. And he just says, I didn't have the courage. The second time, and this is the one that makes me laugh, where he's waiting just near a baklava shop, possibly 4 meters away. He's waiting in the dark for Baha'u'llah to come, and I can imagine his heart beating. And this is the moment where he's going to shoot Baha'u'llah. He's ready there. His finger's on the trigger. It's cocked. It's loaded. Round the corner comes Baha'u'llah. He's ready. He's going to pull his trigger out, and he doesn't have the courage. He just can't do it. Baha'u'llah, knowing full well he's there with his gun, walks up to him. This guy is so shaken, this ruffian with his pistol in his hand, ends up dropping his pistol. Baha'u'llah then asks his brother, Mirza Musa, says, can you pick up the gun and give it to him? His brother then gives him the gun, gives it back to him and says, okay, I think your house is this way, by the way. I find it absolutely hilarious if you imagine the psyche of the guy who's going to do this. And then Baha'u'llah asking his brother Mirza Musa to pick up the gun and give it to him. And that's what he does. Not fazed at all. Of course, the glory and the majesty is what he can see. He knows full well when he looks at Baha'u'llah, it's not just a normal person he's looking at, the glory and majesty that's emanating out.
Balked in his repeated attempts to achieve his malevolent purpose, Sheikh Abdul Hussein now diverted his energies into a new channel. He promised his accomplice he would raise him to the rank of a minister of the crown if he succeeded in inducing the government to recall Baha'u'llah to Tehran and cast him again into prison. He dispatched lengthy and almost daily reports to the immediate entourage of the Shah. He painted extravagant pictures of the ascendancy enjoyed by Baha'u'llah by representing him as having won the allegiance of the nomadic tribes of Iraq. He claimed that he was in a position to muster in a day fully 100,000 men ready to take up arms at his bidding. He accused him of meditating, in conjunction with various leaders in Persia, an insurrection against the sovereign. By such means as these, he succeeded in bringing sufficient pressure on the authorities in Tehran to induce the Shah to grant him a mandate, bestowing on him full powers and enjoining the Persian ulamas and functionaries to render him every assistance. This mandate the Sheikh instantly forwarded to the ecclesiastics of Najaf and Karbala, asking them to convene a gathering in Kazamain, the place of his residence. A concourse of sheikhs, mullahs, and mujtahids, eager to curry favor with the sovereign, promptly responded. Upon being informed of the purpose for which they had been summoned, they determined to declare a holy war against the colony of exiles, and by launching a sudden and general assault on it to destroy the faith at its heart. To their amazement and disappointment, however, they found that the leading mujtahid among them, the celebrated Sheikh Murtada Ansari, a man renowned for his tolerance, his wisdom, his undeviating justice, his piety, and nobility of character, refused, when apprised of their designs, to pronounce the necessary sentence against the Babis. He it was whom Baha'u'llah later extolled in the Lahi Sultan and numbered among those doctors who have indeed drunk of the cup of renunciation and never interfered with him, and to whom Abdul Baha referred as the illustrious and erudite doctor, the noble and celebrated scholar, the seal of seekers after truth. Pleading insufficient knowledge of the tenets of this community, and claiming to have witnessed no act on the part of its members at variance with the Quran, he, disregarding the remonstrances of his colleagues, abruptly left the gathering, returned to Najaf, after having expressed through a messenger his regret to Baha'u'llah for what had happened and his devout wish for his protection. Frustrated in their designs but unrelenting in their hostility, the assembled divines delegated the learned and devout Haji Mullah Hassan Umu, recognized for his integrity and wisdom, to submit various questions to Baha'u'llah for elucidation. When these were submitted and answers completely satisfactory to the messenger were given, Haji Mullah Hassan, affirming the recognition by the ulamas of the vastness of the knowledge of Baha'u'llah, asked, as an evidence of the truth of his mission, for a miracle that would satisfy completely all concerned. Although you have no right to ask this, Baha'u'llah replied, for God should test his enemies, and they should not test God. Still, I allow and accept this request. The ulamas must assemble and with one accord choose one miracle and write that after the performance of this miracle, they will no longer entertain doubts about me, and that all will acknowledge and confess the truth of my cause. Let them seal this paper and bring it to me. This must be the accepted criterion. If the miracle is performed, no doubt will remain for them, and if not, we shall be convicted of imposture. This clear, challenging, and courageous reply, unexampled in the annals of any religion, and addressed to the most illustrious Shia divines, assembled in their time-honored stronghold, was so satisfactory to their envoy that he instantly arose, kissed the knee of Baha'u'llah, and departed to deliver his message. 3 days later, he sent word that that august assemblage had failed to arrive at a decision and had chosen to drop the matter, a decision to which he himself later gave wide publicity in the course of his visit to Persia, and even communicated in person to the then Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mirza Said Khan. We have, Baha'u'llah is reported to have commented, when informed of their reaction to this challenge. Through this all-satisfying, all-embracing message which we sent, revealed and vindicated the miracles of all the prophets, inasmuch as we left the choice to the ulamas themselves, undertaking to reveal whatever they would decide upon. If we carefully examine the text of the Bible Abdul Baha has written concerning a similar challenge made later by Baha'u'llah in the Lahi Sultan, we see that the divine manifestation never said to those who denied him, "Whatever miracle you desire, I am ready to perform, and I will submit to whatever test you propose." But in the epistle to the Shah, Baha'u'llah said clearly, "Gather the ulamas and summon me, that the evidences and proofs may be established."
Sheikh Abul Hussein is still causing problems. He's causing as many problems as he can. He wants to try and get Baha'u'llah to Iran. And he says to Mirza Bazar, if you can do something and get him back to Iran, I'll make sure you're promoted. Corruption upon corruption. There's this mandate that's sent to the Shah, and they try to accuse him of insurrection against the Shah. And these ecclesiastics are all called in Najaf. They're all brought together for trying to attack the Babis. And they had come up with this plan that they're going to attack all the Babis in Baghdad and wipe them out, essentially. Somebody by the name of Sheikh Murtadaya Ansari, who was like a head ulama, he was then brought down as well, and he came down to this meeting. As the rest of them were saying, yes, let's kill the Babis, let's do this, he's the one that says, absolutely not. This is not going to happen. And he's the one who puts a block to this. Abdul Baha actually calls him the sealer of the seeker of truth. So much he's revered this guy, Sheikh Murtadaya Ansari. He then ends up leaving Najaf and going back to where he was from, and he even writes a letter to Baha'u'llah and explains what had happened. And he says, I'm so sorry, had I have known for a moment that this was their purpose, I wouldn't have come. I wouldn't have even done it. Haji Mullah Hassan then asks Baha'u'llah for a miracle. He says, right, we want you to come up with a miracle, and then we'll believe. Obviously, if you come up with this miracle, we are on side, we will believe. Baha'u'llah understands what's going on and says, why don't you come up with a miracle? If you all assemble and gather on one miracle that then you will say that you believe in me, do that. Take this paper, seal it and bring it to me, and then I will do it. Of course, Haji Mullah Hassan Amu is not going to do this. He's a bit worried. The messenger then goes back, and they can't come up with anything because they know full well that if Baha'u'llah fulfills this miracle, they have to accept. And this shows you their mindset. They have to accept. You would want to accept if this is truly the glory of God that's here. You would absolutely be jumping with joy, but this is the lens in which they're looking for it. Of course, if they do accept, what happens to their positions of power? What happens to everything around them? This is the way in which they're seeing things. So they then didn't accept this. And then a messenger tells the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mirza Said Khan, about this whole, and Baha'u'llah says, look, we have given them this option. We left the choice to the ulamas themselves to come up with something, but they did not. Never at any point did they do this. And the epistle to the Shah, Baha'u'llah said clearly, gather the ulamas and summon me, that the evidences and proofs may be established. So Baha'u'llah is already saying, you can come and do it. Anything you want, I will do. Of course, that's not going to happen.
All the texts that are cited here, is there anything specific that we need to take from them?
Yeah, I think they're extremely significant. So the Kitab-i-Iran we've been waiting for 2,000 years for a book that will explain all of these terms and doctrines that have divided religion. So basically, by revealing the Kitab-i-Iran, Baha'u'llah provides a foundation for the reconciliation of all the religions, because he redefines all of the concepts that had divided religions for centuries. So it's a very significant book. You could even argue, too, that Baha'u'llah not only lays the foundation for the reconciliation of all the religions, but also for science and religion, because he explains that much of the passages, most of the passages in religious scripture are to be taken symbolically or figuratively, not literally. And then he explains that the Hidden Word is the most important ethical book, for the most important book for the ethical teachings of the Baha'i faith. And then he explains that the Seven Valleys is the most important book for the mystical teachings of the Baha'i faith. So he gives us a little bit, just in a paragraph or two, just a little bit of a thumbnail sketch of those books, but you can see, they're extremely important books in their own right.
In addition, I don't know whether you noticed in that list, the last one, Jawahirul Asrar. The Universal House of Justice, out of the bounty of their munificence, they, Sandra, translated that. And it's come out in English as the Gems of Mysteries. And actually, it is not as big as the Book of Certitude. Am I right? Not as voluminous, but it covers.
Yeah, it's a shorter book, and it's kind of interesting. It's almost, and this is probably not the best description, but it's almost a cross between the Kitab-i-Iran and the Seven Valleys. You find themes, in both of those books that are reiterated in the Gems of Divine Mystery, but it's actually quite short, and it's actually kind of amusing. I think at the end of the book, Baha'u'llah complains that he could reveal more valleys, more cities, but the messenger was in a hurry to take back the answer. so he made the tablet shorter than it would otherwise be, or at least that's what he hints at. Maybe he was just joking.
Thank you very much, dear Khaza. Thank you very much, Nabil. Thank you to each and every one of you who joined us today. The story will continue. We're making good progress, I feel. We're munching away at this book. For our first time, of course, we will do this again and again and again and pull out more of these gems. So I would like to now move on to the devotional portion. So please, ladies and gentlemen, if you would share some prayers, that would be much appreciated. Thank you very much.
هل من مفرج غير الله قل سبحان الله هو الله كل عباد له وكل بأمره قائم